Straight ahead. And straight ahead right here, please, everybody. You guys, just move everyone.
Yeah, can we go this way? Thank you. Please look over here. Thank you.
And then guys, just one in the middle. Perfect. And a couple to your left, far left here, please. Thank you very much. And just squeeze in on the right. Squeeze in on the right. There you go. And right in the center here, please. Perfect. That's good. And then right here, your hand right here. Whoop. Here we go. Right here with your hand.
To live here. That was nice.
We love movies.
We
live and breathe movies.
Thank you, Toronto Film Festival. It is a wonderful, wonderful place to come as a filmmaker.
I love the movie. If you want to talk about it after, I'll be walking around, probably around Chinatown or whatever.
Enjoy the film, guys, and thank you again, and thank you for having us. It's so great to be in my home country of Canada. Thank you, thank you.
Our moderator for today is Eric Kohanek, and it's now my pleasure to welcome the director and members of the cast for Burn Your Maps.
Well, good morning and welcome to the press conference for Burn Your Maps, a TIFF special presentation that will have its official world premiere tonight at the Ryerson Theatre. Burn Your Maps is an emotion-filled comedy drama about a young boy who wants to rediscover what he thinks are his real roots. And with us today, seated next to me, Jordan Roberts, the film's director and the screenwriter of the film as well. Next to Jordan, Vera Farmiga, who plays the role of Elise, the mother of the young boy who's at the core of the film. Next to Vera, we have Jacob Tremblay, who takes on the role of Wes, otherwise known as Gonzarig, throughout the film, as he prefers to be called there. And last but not least, next to Jacob, we have Virginia Madsen, who plays the part of Victoria, a former nun who's also on a journey of self-discovery throughout the film. If you have any questions, we have a microphone runner, so just stick up your hand and we'll get a mic to you. I'll start it off by asking you, Jordan, how this film was based on a short story, and how did you come across the story, and how did you transition it to a script?
The story is written by a woman named Robin Joy Leff, a lovely writer. And I can get the order mixed up, but my mother, my father, and my wife all read it first in the Atlantic, where it was published, Harper's, where it was published. And then they all recommended it, and I read it, and instantly fell in love with it. It was only about 17 pages, and it didn't involve much of what the film does, but it was about a marriage in crisis. And I think at the time, and this was 2002, I was fascinated by the idea of marriage in crisis. I've been married 25 years, but at the time, like any married person, you know, marriage is a challenge. And what the story did, which was, I thought, fascinating, was it had this very typically, for the time, kind of a cynical observation of the institution, which is fair, because we can cynically look at marriage. It's failing more often than it succeeds. But by the end of the story, she had done this amazing thing where she took that kind of smugness, for lack of a better word, and allowed herself to examine the possibility of that union. And it was very, very moving to me that this family that was on the verge of ripping apart suddenly found a moment of identification with what it was. And so that just compelled me enough to option the material and not write it for 12 years. And then finally, 12 years later, and I think really the reason was my son was old enough for me to even begin to contemplate letting him go. Whereas I read the story when my son was probably 3 or 4, and the idea of allowing your child to become somebody other than who you think he was, I think was just too scary for me. So the short answer is, it took a long time to be willing to explore letting our children be who they are. And 2 years ago, I finally had I was going to say balls, but I had the courage to do so. And he's ready to leave. He's left the house, so it was a little easier.
And then the process of actually getting it financed and film, to make the film out of it?
Well, the quick version of that is that I worked with a woman for 22 years who was my producer on the last 2 films I've made, one of the producers, and she encouraged me for this entire 12, 14-year period to go back to this story, and she knew that it was a story that I needed to tell, and I finally wrote it, and then she passed away just before we started production. But I was involved with a producer named Patrick Aiello, and we were looking for someone to let us make the movie the way we wanted to make it, and that included some people that are seated at this table with me, which we knew right away I did. And we found Sinaloo, which is Courtney Solomon and Mark Canton, and they were 100% behind the film as I envisioned it, which was not something we expected and something I will always be grateful for. And they just let us make the movie we wanted to make and supported us 100%.
And then the cast, you have a great cast. How did you assemble them? Who came first to the table?
Vera was somebody that I knew from the get-go. That was in its inception, and as soon as I met her, there was no wavering from that. And so that was a deal breaker for me when we went out looking for financing, and I hope you know that. And then we started the process, obviously, of looking for a little squirt, and about a year before we made the film, an agent at UTA sent me a clip of a young man who at the time was probably 6, and it was an audition tape for, I don't even think they made the picture, but it was an audition tape, and it was absolutely mesmerizing to watch this young person, who is Jacob, I'm speaking of, inhabit an imaginary circumstance so completely. I mean, there was no acting going on at all. He was 100% present in this imaginary scenario, and it just flabbergasted me, so that it took a year to raise the money, and so by the time we got to making the film, he was, I think, probably the first young man I met. I asked to see him instantly. He flew up to Vancouver, and oh no, he did his own audition tape, I believe, and it was, again, mind-boggling. You know, he was a year or so older, incredibly mature. He made very powerful, strong choices. He has wonderful parents who obviously have something to do with what he does, but when I saw his tape, it was just staggeringly powerful again, and completely honest. So I met him, and I had to do due diligence for obvious reasons, because nobody had ever heard of Jacob Tremblay, and so I ended up reading a lot of other children, and then happily and luckily cast this young man who nobody heard of, and then the day after we wrapped, he came here, and the rest is history. So that's how he came. And then, you know, again, across the line, I had Mary Vernew was the casting director, and she consistently told me to be patient and not worry. And she was right, because role after role after role was filled by wonderful, wonderful actors. And the team we put together was, and I suspect this is probably true most of the time, but we absolutely were a family. And there's not a single piece of that family that isn't integral to the film. It feels...
Maybe you can chime in on this and how you came to the film, and what about the script sort of touched you and moved you into wanting to do it?
Well, you know, it's rare for me to read a story and feel that that it's fortified spiritually, and this presented itself to me like a parable. There was so much love and wisdom and hope, and I was really and it also came to me in a somewhat spiritually turbulent time in my life, where, without going into detail, my husband and I as well had just been presented a kind of a stick in our spokes in our family, and so it was a little death. This thing that happened in our life was just a little death, which in tandem with reading this script, reminded me that life is a series of rebirths. And that profoundly touched me, and I found it to be so beautiful. And Elise resonated with me quite deeply. And then I met Maestro, and there is such a grace and a wisdom and a fun. He's so fun-loving, and he's such an elegant man. And really, I only want to, at this point in my career, I want to have fun. I want to be in a holy environment. I want to be surrounded by good people, and to me, this was a clear yes. And so we met, shared our stories. Also, my family had experienced at this very time. I had a cousin who had experienced a stillbirth with his wife, and that trickled down through the entire family as well. And so that was a complex grief that first-handedly had impacted my life at the time. Which just informed my response to the script. We had met, and then the call, I think a year and a half later, came. It's it. We found financing with you. So, yeah, it was a delicious opportunity for me.
And Jacob, Jordan said that you were unknown, but of course that was before Room came along, and things changed a lot for you. Do you want to talk a bit about how you met Jordan and came into this?
Well, I think that I did a audition tape, and then Jordan came over to Vancouver, my hometown, and we met at my agent's office, and we made ghosts together out of toilet paper. And we sort of just had conversations, and I told him some of the lines, and he decided to pick me.
And Virginia, how did you come into this? This is it's not a major role in the film, but it is a significant one.
I had to be a part of it. It didn't really matter to me the size of the role. I loved the role. I loved that she was a woman sort of trying to find a new life and a new side of herself that she had ignored. And of course, I was so excited to work with Vera. I just love her work. I'm a fan, and even if we had just one scene, if we just had one scene by the fire, I would have done it just for that. And it was really an extraordinary experience because we were in Calgary. And you remember how amazing the storms were when they came through? Yeah. And you got to ride a horse.
Feeling everywhere.
Yeah, it was just so beautiful. And to watch him running around with goats and, just this wonderful human having a great time being a kid. And it's not always like that for young people on movies. But Jordan and I think all of us, embraced this environment, and he just got to be free. I mean, I guess sometimes it was pretty long hours, but for the most part, you seemed like you were having a good time.
Sometimes, but we were filming in the Rockies and in open plains and in giant cliffs and rivers. So it's I kind of wanted to stay there for a long time because then I had to go back to Calgary where my hotel is. But then whenever we go on set, I get to explore Alberta.
Speaking of Alberta, Jordan, I would never have thought that Kananaskis could double for Mongolia.
Yeah, me either. There was no way of, there's no infrastructure currently. There did not appear to be any infrastructure in Mongolia to support us making the film there at the budget, I think under almost any circumstance, but we certainly weren't able to do it. And I'd heard about Calgary and their sister cities. Calgary is a sister city of Ulaanbaatar, which is the capital of, they're literally sister cities. They exchange ambassadors, and they have a lot in common. They have the same population, same general production and agricultural ties, et cetera. There are also, happily, 700 Mongolians living in Calgary. And that was the deal breaker for me, because I knew we'd have to do some local casting, and there was no way we were not going to cast Mongolians in those roles. And every Mongolian you see in the film is played by a Mongolian. And all of them live in Calgary, except the older shaman who we flew over from Mongolia. But before we went, I sent a friend on a scouting expedition to Mongolia to find locations that sort of matched Calgary so that we could combine them, and it worked out perfectly. We found 7 or 8 locations in Mongolia that truly do look like Calgary, or outside Calgary, Alberta, and then we figured out a way very carefully to map them so that the car could drive in Mongolia and arrive in Calgary, and it just worked out perfectly. Tiny bit of color correction, but.
And Jacob, how was it playing with goats and running around and playing with horses and that?
It was so awesome because I got to learn how to ride a horse, and I got to feed baby goats, but they're really cute. Goats are really cute, especially the baby ones, but they do smell a little bit. And I got to ride a horse with no arms while it's trotting, and I also had to learn how to ride a horse without a saddle. If you do that, it kind of hurts, if you know what I'm saying.
Vera, Jacob's has got a really great personality, and the mother-son bond between Elise and Wes is so strong in the film. How long did it take for you for the chemistry to connect?
Chemistry for me is always just mostly part willingness. I mean, we have no choice but to connect. And this guy is, I mean, you see what you see is what you get. He's a very open little dude. He just wants to have a good time. He's mischievous. And so am I. And he was probably even better behaved on set than I was most times. And you know, it's just easy. It's easy. He's a very savvy young actor, very deep in touch with his emotions. He has a very unique relationship with his own mom, which I was able to witness on a daily basis and see how she is very much a part of his process. And I hung out with his mom a lot and have worked with his sister before, so there was already immediately there was a closeness. Yeah.
I just would like to say something that was immediately clear. We were a low-budget film, lowish budget, and we didn't have a lot of time, and we had a child, which meant we only had so many hours of the day. So there were on a couple occasions times when I needed to move things along, and I asked Jacob to sort of bring me something that he might not have actually, there's only a couple times, but I'm being honest, something that might not have been organically present, and to his unbelievable quality, it's not, I don't know that he willfully refused. I'm not even sure you totally understand what I'm talking about, but he's not capable. He was not capable of phoning in anything. And on those few occasions when I was running out of time and I needed him to fucking do it, he wouldn't. And I just find that an extraordinary gift, and I hope that never changes, because he really did me a favor by doing that. I'll probably get kicked out of the DGA for saying that.
We have a question down here in the front.
Good morning, Bruce Kirkland, the Toronto Sun Media. This is a question probably for Jordan, but I have a feeling that others may want to address it too. This is exactly the kind of film that belongs in a festival. How do you get these humanistic, personalized stories out in the general public after a festival? And why do they deserve to exist? I have my own version of saying that. I'd love to hear from you.
I'll jump in on that. They deserve to exist because they're essential. You know, I told this story because I absolutely had to tell it. Everybody that involved had to tell the story. We are in a time when human stories are few and far between. We're telling stories about machines, and we're telling stories about mechanized humanity. And what I love about this particular story, and there are films like this, is its willingness to explore full throttle humanity with all its ugliness. You know, to take a character like Elise, the mother in the film, who is unwilling to not do anything in her power to hold a family together that's falling apart. And yet to allow her to do that in a way that is both heroic but unbelievably and constantly human is imperative for me as a human being to watch. The reason I believe we started painting on caves and telling stories was to learn how to be human. And I think that that is just as essential. It is vastly more essential today because there's less structure teaching us how to be human. So the stories we tell are essential. How do we get it out there? I think you guys. We need help, you know. People need to acknowledge what we've done, and what we've done is rare because we're willing to completely invest ourselves in a human drama with vulnerability and honesty. So that's my answer.
Yeah, no, he articulated very eloquently, yes. It was essential for me to, I can only come from myself, it was essential for me to receive this. And the way I was going to receive this story was to interpret it. And it's true, it really is, now it's word of mouth, and it's, you know, it's critical response, because this is, look, I've done these stories enough to know what are the roles that people see, and in the roles that I wish people would see. And, you know, and now I suppose even the medium has changed. Look, television has given a larger platform for stories like this to be viewed immediately. A film like this deserves to be seen on a tremendous screen in its entirety and in its majesty. It's word of.
I just would add that, you know, in its inception, that when I read the story, and I made a couple independent films at the time, or I'd come to make them, but in the center of this story is this uniquely uplifting idea of this child who defines himself in a strange way. And at the end of the day, this movie, you know, this was intention from the very beginning. It is about the triumph of not just the promise of resurrection, but the reformation of a broken entity. And we achieved that. And what we wanted to do was create a circumstance where the brokenness was so intense that the likelihood of a reconstruction of this broken entity called a family was challenged. But at the end of the day, this film, without being Pollyanna, and in my opinion, without being cloying or manipulative or even ideally sentimental, it is about the triumph of the human spirit and the capacity of us to change and grow, which is a story, again, that needs to be told. And that, to me, is a commercial idea. It is not a cynical film. It is, from its core, never willing to be cynical, but it's very dark in places. But it refuses to be cynical, and that's why I love it.
Did you want to chime in on this, Virginia?
Well, I think there's also another side to this, which I think you were touching on, that these very human stories there's getting to be fewer and fewer of them, because it's very hard to get this kind of film without a lot of bells and whistles to get financing and then to get it sold and distributed. That's sort of the state of our mainstream big screens. But as Vera was saying, now there's a place that these films can succeed. I mean, I'm old enough to remember that if my film didn't make it, if it didn't come out, then it would be lost on some shelf somewhere, if it even came out on VHS, remember that. And now a lot of the films that you've seen here at the festival will find a home on alternate media. But it is true that it's just so incredible to see it, this film in particular, to be able to see it on the big screen. And a lot of films at festivals will never be seen that way except for just this once. I think ours will have a longer life than that, but so it's good to feel the support.
And Jordan, what was your reaction then when the Toronto Film Festival let you know that it was going to be part of the special presentation?
I posted the movie here, so I was here for 5 months, and I just sort of assumed I would be back, and they were patient in inviting me. So it took, you know, and that's just how they roll it out. And so I experienced a week or so of like absolute apoplectic dread and confusion and despair, to be totally frank. And then the phone call came, and overwhelming joy. I say this in all sincerity, and I would say this if this conference were taking place in Denver. This film was made in Canada, and Canada helped me make this film. It really genuinely did. I don't have to tell anyone that my country is engaged in a kind of ugliness that is unprecedented. And I found the gentleness and the kindness and the humanity of the people who came in early in this city, people I met, waiters, bartenders, people I met. They came and they watched the early cuts of the film. They were the people I talked to. And their humanity encouraged me to continue down the path I was on. And so if I weren't here, it would be fucking criminal. So I'm delighted.
Well,
oh, sorry. Sorry, Jason and Christina. I'm sorry. That's Jacob's parents.
One of the reasons the film is so great on the big screen is visually there are some spectacular shots. Can you talk about your approach to the film visually and some of the wide vistas that you use?
John Bailey was my cinematographer, and John Bailey is a genius, and he's been around forever. And the fact that I got to work with a man who made any number of pictures, Ordinary People, Silverado. I mean, this man knows scale. He knows. And what is amazing about John and why it was such a pleasure to work with him, and any of these actors will tell you, he is only interested in telling story. And so that the scale we achieve, when we achieve it, it's because it's appropriate to the story. He never once did a shot, either whether it's small or large, that didn't reflect what was happening in the narrative and in the story. But we always knew, and this was John, the day I met him over lunch, he said to me, this is a story that moves this way, visually. It moves this way. There's no way we can start this film without it being in a compacted environment, both in terms of how we shoot it, the lenses we use, and the environments themselves. And as we begin to emerge on this journey, geographically, but also emotionally, the palette, the frame widens. The color palette changes, becomes earthier, becomes more alive and more vibrant, and that was John. And we understood each other. I don't think we disagreed. Maybe twice. We had a different point of view about how to look at something, but that was John.
He loved the light, and he would sometimes just be standing there going, "Just look at that," just because Calgary, there's a kind of a wonderful golden light there that's very specific to Calgary, I felt. And
yep. And in terms of meshing the images in Mongolia, that was guided by him as well, in terms of how do we do that? How did we go from one environment to the other and have it feel organic and not feel like we were just throwing up big showpieces of Mongolia, but how do you organically make every image feed the next and work in cohesion with each other? That was John Bailey.
We have a question down here.
Hi, this question is for Jacob. As Jordan mentioned, it's been a year since you've been here when you came to the festival as an unknown. Now you're back as a star. I'm just wondering how you feel today, how you've changed as an actor, as a person. Do you feel differently being here? What memories are coming to you?
Well, I don't feel like a different person, but I'm really excited to do this and celebrate and do all this press for a new movie. And I'm excited to move on to this one because this was a really fun one that I did. So I don't think I really changed. I think I changed in age, but I think that I was just really excited to come back here again for like the second year in a row, because I came here last year and for Room, and now I get to be here again for this wonderful movie.
Jacob, Wes is kind of a quirky character. He's fun. What did you like about him, and what did you find interesting about how that character was created?
I think I was really interested in like his story and why he wants to move to Mongolia, because when I figured that out, it was probably like when I was doing like probably a few weeks after we filmed, I noticed why he was doing that, because his little sister died, and I don't know if this is right, but moving to Mongolia would probably make him be happier. So I think it was really interesting how smart he is and why he would want to go to Mongolia, and because his sister died, and
That's good. Jordan, talk a bit about some of the other cast members. Suraj Sharma, for instance, and Martin Csokas are in the film as well.
Well, so let's start with Suraj because he came first. The film, and for those who haven't seen it, the film involves a relationship between Jacob, this 8-year-old American, and an expatriate from India, named Ishmael, who has a Muslim name, as he says, in a Hindu country. But so he's a displaced person, another displaced person looking for a home. And the film is, among other things, very much a buddy movie between these two strangers who are both looking for home. As they say, they're both lost boys. As a white male living in Venice, California, to have concocted this Indian character, I was very, very concerned that he be a real person and he not, be what we've seen or what we're encouraged to see or what is frequently represented. And I was obviously nervous about it, and I'd spent some time with some Indian young men, because he's an invented character, he's not in the story. Where he's a Pakistani who's 50 in the short story, but he's a smaller role. But at any rate, as soon as I heard Suraj read these words, I was flabbergasted, because he was a fully fledged human being. And I remember on our first phone call, I said, listen, I just have to ask you, did I insult you? Is there anything insulting about this? Is there I'm sorry. He said, yeah, there's something insulting. His name is Ishmael. Like, what's up with him being Ishmael? And I realized I just changed him from a Pakistani to an Indian without changing his name. And he said, no, but he said that it was his idea. He said, that's fascinating. He should be Ishmael still, but he should be in a Hindu country with a Muslim name. That's perfect. And I thought, and that's now in the movie. But there's no describing Suraj. When you see the film, he is just a radiant heartbeat. And one of my very favorite elements of the story is to tell a real story about a young boy and a young man who absolutely bond in brotherhood without question from the start. And that is just extra, because I was a young man who was brought into myself by men. And so frequently these stories are told about predators. It was so lovely to tell a story that on the surface of it, you have this 22-year-old Indian man and this 8-year-old boy hanging out together, that it lends itself to a kind of presupposed horror. And I was so delighted to see these two not only bond personally, but on film, bond as literally brothers. And that wouldn't have happened without Suraj. I mean, it really, he is such a gigantic, enormous beating heart. I'm sure Jacob will concur.
They were very much brothers on
the
set.
They were brothers.
You guys were pretty tight.
Yeah.
kind of even fool around in a bit when they're rolling, and they'd say, Jacob and Suraj, you have to be quiet just for 3 minutes, please.
Yeah, you guys were always kind of like needling each other. It was fun to watch.
And then the character of Batbire, who has been an Australian surfer dude, who's been maybe a Mongolian. We went all over the place, and I was looking, and Mary sent in this. All I knew is that he needed to be a hunk. Like, that's all I knew. I just knew I needed somebody who would trigger kind of passion in a woman, and who was charming, and who was also his own lost soul. And Ramon, I Skyped with him, and the second he read with me, it was, again, crystal clear that this was, I had not written a Puerto Rican displaced in Mongolia, but it was perfect, again, that I could have another wandering vagabond who's still not home yet. And we went through the script together as soon as he got to Calgary and spent 3 days together trying to figure out how to make this a real Puerto Rican New Yorker, New York Puerto Rican living in Mongolia, and how do we do that? And he brought it full tilt, and he charms the shit out of me. There's a makeout scene with him that is, I could watch it forever. I don't know what that means, but I just could watch it forever. He's charming and loving and real, and again, real. And then Martin came, we lost an actor, which, as frequently happens, it's a blessing. It was a tragedy, and then it wasn't, and then Martin and I started Skyping, and I saw in him, and it's a very complicated role, the fact that we love this character in spite of his being really the only antagonist we have. And he's not really that, but he really is the person who's taking the longest to recognize what's happening. But in the other sense, that I actually think this character is the one who needs it the most. And the fact that he does some of the things he does and that we love the reconciliation that takes place, I think speaks volumes to his work, because it is really tough on the page to watch a father who so misunderstands somebody that we're watching and recognizing so powerfully as organic and true. We're watching a father push against that, and yet he makes that happen. And I think at the end of the day, what he got, and he did get it, this is a story of two different people, a husband and a wife, in two very different ways, desperately trying to save their family and desperately trying to save their son. And they both, that's why I think it makes good drama, they both think they're doing it the right way. So, and then Taylor, the young girl who played Jacob's sister, again, Skypes. All we were looking for is the capacity to act truthfully under imaginary circumstances, which is the best definition of acting I've ever heard, and we lucked out.
All right, I'm afraid we're out of time. Burn Your Maps is a TIFF special presentation. As I said before, it will have its official world premiere tonight at 6 o'clock at the Ryerson Theater. There are 2 more public screenings on Friday and Sunday at the Bloor Hot Dock Cinema and the Scotiabank Theater. Thank you all for coming. Thanks for being here, guys.